Welcome to the MHP CashFlow Podcast, where we dive deep into the world of mobile home park investing, real estate strategies, and building long-term passive income. Hosted by Garrett, Terrell, real estate investor, mobile home park operator, and founder of Rocket Capital Fund.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the MHP CashFlow Podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Terrell, and today we have a very special guest in Mr. Frank Rizzo from Stone Capital Investors and the MHP Exchange. Frank, thanks for hopping on.
Garrett, thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So excited to talk with you about mobile home parks, right? We both love mobile home parks. And I've heard from multiple people, not just one or two, but multiple people, that you're just a stud operator. So talk with me about how you got to be a good operator. You know, what are some of the key skills and, you know, attributes that you need to acquire as a good operator? Kind of walk me through that.
Well, first of all, I don't know who's spreading rumors like that around. But you know, Garrett, it's funny because, you know, when you first get into this space and you don't know anything about mobile home park investing, right? When you first start, you might have a real estate background and you have some core competencies in real estate. You start to realize that mobile home park investing is completely different than anything else you might know, right? It is just a different animal altogether. So the first park that my partner and I had purchased together, you know, we had raised money from friends and family, and we thought we were going to take the conservative approach, right, and act as asset managers and essentially just hire a property manager to manage the property for us, and then we would manage the property manager, right? That was the idea. And we would have our weekly meetings to go over where we were and expectations and making sure things were inside a budget. Well, within the first 6 months, our tenant base dropped about 50%. We got no new applications had come in. We had been riding the property managers so hard, right, that they were not performing, that essentially they had sent us a letter saying they're going to terminate the relationship with us. They basically fired us, right, because our expectations were X, their performance was Y. So we had been, 6 months into the deal, we realized that the numbers weren't jiving with where we had underwrote with our expectations of what we thought was going to happen. And it was a Thursday evening, and my partner and I got in the car and we said we're going to drive down and we're going to fix this ourselves. So we're driving 17 hours from Staten Island, New York to Jacksonville, Alabama. I had gotten a list of anybody who had contacted the property manager in the last 6 months looking for housing. And I was just setting appointments as we drove through the night, through the next morning, and I'm setting appointments. And we just literally drive straight to the park, 17-hour drives. And we start showing units that whole weekend. And that weekend we took in 8 applications, right? So it was a 31-unit park. There was like 24 residents in there. We were at 11. We took in 8 applications, and that Monday morning when the property manager's office opened, I dropped off the keys, 8 applications with leases and deposit checks. And I said, well, if we're going to do this, we have to do this, right? We cannot rely on somebody third party. And so it was really a baptism by fire, I would say that really kind of took us to a different level, right? And we realized this was going to be successful. We wanted to control the product. We really had to control the process.
Wow. So you basically just jumped into the deep end and just took the bull by the horns. Like, that must have been scary, right? Because you had 50% occupancy and you're like, this property manager's not doing his job. We got to step in and do it. That had to have been scary, right? On your first park too?
It was, looking back, you think about the stuff that you don't know, right? And we've been fortunate, 24 parks past that. But at that point, it was a little concerning, and the concerning wasn't so much that, hey, we just had a bad month or a bad quarter, but we had a reputation, we had capital at stake, we had investors who had worked with us for a number of years, and we wanted to ensure that their faith in us was going to be rewarded, right? So we had to make sure that we made this work. And when you're a sponsor or you're a fiduciary, I mean, you have to make sure that you're giving your 100% effort, energy, and attention to make sure that investment works, right? And understanding the risks in that. So, my partner and I both were of the same mindset that whatever it took to make this investment work for our partners, we were going to do. And if it meant me, spending a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, moving down there, I was willing to do whatever it took to make sure that my investors' faith in us was going to be rewarded. And fortunately, it turned out from that point, it pivoted. And when we wanted to make a move, our investors were like, why are you selling this? This has been such a great, it's done everything you said it was going to do.
Wow.
But
that's awesome. Wow. Yeah. So that's your first intro into mobile home park investing. Basically, you took a value add deal and basically flipped it. Essentially, you didn't buy a turnkey deal that cash flowed from day one. You bought a value add deal, your very first deal.
Well, you know what? Quite frankly, when we first bought that deal, we thought it was a cash flowing deal from day one, right? You had 31 lots, there was 24 residents in place. They were paying on the market, right? Rents, but they were paying, right? So we thought we were at 70% occupancy. City water, city sewer, wasn't a huge park. So it didn't, for us, it said, well, if we were going to step into this arena and we were going to do this, we did try to eliminate as many variables as possible for us on our first investment so we can really get to understand the operations. And while our expectation was that's what it was going to be, the moment we closed, 50% of those residents left because the manager they had at that park at the time, who really wasn't doing a phenomenal, wasn't doing the job that they really should have. Those residents left when he left because I guess he must have said that the new people are coming in, they're going to raise rents, they're going to do this, and people just left before we had a chance to say hello. So we started day one and we were just losing people left and right.
Wow. That's that's a value add deal. Is that kind of the deals that you're looking for? I mean, are you looking for value add, or what are you looking for when you're underwriting a park?
So when we go in now, Garrett, I mean, we do have we think that we specialize in looking for value add or deeper value add park. I mean, we're really we're basis buyers. We're not looking to step into we're not looking at a cap rate when we buy day one. We understand that, we're probably going to see a transformational period in the communities that we own and operate to get it to where we want it to be. So we are looking for those, diamonds in the rough, so to speak. And our typical buy is like a 1 or 1.5 star park, and we'll bring that up to 3.5 or 4 stars over time. So when we step into a community now, we're looking for those value add opportunities because that's where we feel that we can create true value for the existing residents, right? Because we're going to drastically change and improve those communities and allow for new residents to come in closer to market, right? And that creates the equity multiple and the cash flow for us over time.
Nice. So when you're identifying a park, right, and I've driven by some of these and walked some of these properties. Some of these are rough, right? Like really rough. How do you gauge too rough versus, okay, we can do something with this, and what is your value add that are you selling these homes off to the tenants? Are you, infilling and bringing in new homes? Talk to me about that.
So you know what, it's so great about the question that you're just asking, and this is what makes the mobile home park investing industry so different, right, than maybe other classes of real estate investing is because there are so many different variables inside the community that you're owning, right? So when you take a look at the homes, right, what are we looking to do with the homes? Our model is we like, tenant-owned homes. And the reason why, there's a number of reasons for it, but at the end of the day, what we feel is if we can create a pathway for home ownership for our residents inside our community, that pride of ownership takes over and it becomes a better run community over time, right? Less transitory nature, people are looking to stay in their homes for longer, and it gives them stability, and it gives us the opportunity to do what we do best, which is work on the improvements, adding amenities, making sure the community is safe and clean and secure, and a great place to live, and bring in new homes. Mm-hmm. So that becomes a key for us. So in terms of how we look at a park or a market, how rough and what market is it in, right? Where do we see the upside in that market, right? Do we think that we're in a market where if we make our capital improvements, are we going to get a yield on cost that's going to work for us inside of 24 months? I mean, we're fortunate enough to have some patient capital behind us where we understand that it's when you're transforming a community, it's not going to happen, in 3 months, but we look at this in, 24-month, 36-month, 60-month time frame, and where are we going to be at those milestones? How long is it going to take to transform that community? So we look at the outside market, number one, right? We want to make sure that we're in an MSA that's stable. We're not catalyst buyers, meaning I'm not going into an area because we think that there's going to be a pop, but there's a stability in the base of where we are. We like to see that there's demand for housing, right? And that we can create value by improving that park and getting to market over a period of time. And then, our improvements are going to have a significant, a nice yield on our cost. Yeah.
So it sounds like you're kind of focused on major MSAs within a certain amount of distance from a big MSA. You're not looking at deals way out in the boonies with 1,500 people, right? You're wanting to stay within a good market, or are you?
Well, that's you could sometimes there's no bad real estate. There's only bad prices, right?
Yes.
So there could be deals to be found in some of those other, tertiary or rural markets, but you have to understand where the value is there. And I'll give you a perfect, for instance, one of our best performing deals, right? Because I know one of the deals that we found that worked really, really well for investors, and it was we had just come out of a park, and a broker had come to us with a deal in Americus, Georgia, right? So Americus is a solid market, but usually a little smaller than what we would take. There wasn't a real big driver there. Mm-hmm. And they had a family who was looking to sell a 33-unit park, which was a little small, right, for us. And we said, nah. But they had a 21-unit park, like right down the block. And so they weren't going to sell it, but then the family put both of it together. And in this park in particular, Garrett, the gentleman who owned the parks, he was a mobile home dealer. So when we walked into the park and we saw they were all park-owned homes, but the homes were in probably some of the best conditions that we've ever seen, because he had a dealership where he would take in the homes, his guys would renovate it, and he would put it on his park. And the interior of these homes were in phenomenal condition, but an interesting point is that he didn't believe in skirting. So we had 54 lots, we had 52 homes, no skirting, because he believed that by having the skirting on, he couldn't see if there was a leak. So he wanted to see if there was a leak. All park-owned homes. And we ended up buying both of those parks with 52 homes for $750,000, right?
Wow,
which was a
dirt cheap.
dirt cheap, right? It was an opportunity that we couldn't pass up because the numbers made so much sense.
Yeah.
So we went in, we bought the park. We did, there were dirt roads. We paved all the roads. We skirted the homes, cool sealed the roofs. There was an estate. The family was selling it, so there was some deferred maintenance that we had to take care of. But within a year, we were able to exit at a double on our invested capital, which turned out to be a great return for everybody. So I mean,
wow.
Those are some opportunities that you might find in outside markets. But it came back to where we bought, and we were able to buy this right. I mean, we bought this at the right price at the right time, and those homes that were included in it were almost a gimme, right? And we almost got them, essentially for free.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, you definitely bought it right. I mean, that's a very cheap deal. It's like, how do you lose on something like that? I mean, that's like 15K a pad. I mean, that's very, very cheap.
And it was almost 100% occupied, and I mean the rents were below market, but at that price point you could live with it, right? Because it just made economic sense, and we could make the improvements we needed to do in the park. And when we positioned it for sale, we were able to get a buyer pretty quickly, and I believe right now they're looking to sell that park for north of $2 million. So I mean, I think it's worked all the way along the line. And it just turned out to be a really good investment for us.
That's huge. That's huge. So, are you buying these parks with hard money, or are you buying them with bank debt? What's kind of your process for that?
So, because Garrett, and we do this probably a little different than most other, sponsors or operators in our space, because we're the nature of the communities that we're typically acquiring, and because we know there's going to be a transformational period in them, we're typically acquiring these properties either with all cash or with some seller financing layering in, right? So that'll get us to a normalization of the income statement. So once we know that we've gotten the tenant base stabilized, and we could start now working on the infill. And at that point, we'll look to bring in conventional debt onto the property. But we found by doing it this way, we're not stressing the asset at acquisition. It puts us in a position where we could, we can implement the changes we need to, and we're not worrying about, DSCR covenants or where things might be as there's a normal transition from one side to the other. So it's a patient approach, but it's put us in a very good position over the last couple of years where we've had, obviously as rates have gotten reset, that wasn't a concern for us in our portfolio.
Yeah. So that's good. So you're buying these creative, and you're also not having to season them. Because you're buying them with cash or creative, there's no seasoning requirements on those. So that's huge.
And what helps then is when we are going for financing, there's not something that's set from before, right? So now they're looking at here's the value, here's the income that's there, here was the improvements, and we can get a true valuation on a refinance.
Yeah. Okay. So. Next, I want to talk about debt, right? Market debt right now. So this is a problem that I've looked at or ran into recently with the market debt is, when you're evaluating a deal, right? And I heard you say earlier, you prefer all tenant owned, right? Correct. Not as much park owned. So especially when you're raising capital, how are you able to justify the debt service on some of these deals when the lot rent is not really where it's very tight, when it's a tight deal versus a park owned home deal that maybe looks really good cash flow wise but has higher risk? How do you kind of justify a tenant owned home community versus a park owned?
So you have to and this goes back to your earlier question, like you have to almost look at, when you're acquiring a community, you almost have to look at the income in buckets, right? So here's my bucket of lot rent income. Here's the valuation I'm putting on the land. Here's my bucket of park-owned home income, right? And I might put a different valuation on that, right? So I create different buckets because those buckets help me get to that value. Because when you are buying a community, again, not like traditional real estate where if you're buying an apartment build, a multifamily, all that income is there with the building and it's easy to underwrite. When you're buying a mobile home park, a lender may not finance some of that park-owned home revenue. So, your broker might tell you, hey, look at this, it's a 9 cap. But when you pull out that park-owned home revenue, your lender's looking at it completely different. But those homes do have a value, whether it's a shell value, an NADA value. There is a value to those homes or to the income that is being created from there. So one of the things that we'll do in our underwriting process is we'll strip out the value from each line, each segment. Like, this is what the community's worth, this is what the park-owned homes are worth, and that's what this income stream is worth. And then that, as we put it in those buckets, that's how we create the capital stack for that deal, if that makes sense. So It's a little different way of looking at it, but it's allowed us to go in there. And again, for us, especially as you're transforming a community, we don't want to stress the asset. We want to create that value. And when we go securing debt, we're able to pull it out at the value that's being created by us from the work that we're putting in. But a key component to all this, Garrett, is having very good local banking relationships. And we do have a couple of local banking relationships that understand our business, our model. And now when we come into a deal, or we're trying to refinance a deal, or we're trying to get lines of credit on a deal, they understand what we're doing and how we're doing it, and it's become easier to do over time.
Yeah. So it seems like really the main or the biggest value add, the biggest chunk of change that you can make with a park is really converting park-owned to tenant-owned, right? So I see a lot of deals where it's like $300 lot rent, park-owned home rent can be $800 to $900, and it's 100% park-owned, right? If you were to look at a deal like that, first 90 days, what are you doing to add value to that deal? Like, how are you approaching that?
So we look at, if we're buying a deal that has park-owned home rent in there, $800, $900. Now, market is what? $1,000, $1,100? $1,000, right?
Yeah.
So here's one thing that we found throughout, our experience of doing this. Just because we want to sell the homes to those residents, if they don't find the value in owning the home, they're not going to buy it regardless, right?
Yeah.
Because they're going to say, why should I own it if renting it is still more cost effective? Right? So there has to be some value in there. So for us, we always feel like important things that we need to go in there and make some improvements first, right? So any increases we're going to have to rents, we believe that there's going to be, a 9-month lag from our improvements to where we're going to be really able to initiate any change in the lot rents. So we understand that.
Okay.
We'll go in and we'll identify the work or the improvements we have to make first. Now, that might be a major cleanup. That might be road improvements. That might be drainage issues that are impacting the park. That might be doing some exterior repairs of homes that we own, and maybe some homes that residents already own. And what we found, because when you talk about where your biggest value creation is, Garrett, it's not just in the residents that are there, it's in the new residents that you're going to attract, right?
Yeah.
Because if I come into a park and the market, and we could just say $400 a month is probably in a quality park, $400 a month is probably about right we're in the Southeast region, so it's about right.
Yeah.
But if that resident's paying $200 a month for lot rent, they're not going to go. You're not going to be able to take them from 2 to 400, right? There's going to be a time frame for you to get them there. It's the new resident that's going to come in after the park's been cleaned up. They're going to be willing to pay the 400 because there's where they're going to see the value. So for us, it's what can we do to make the park attract new people to come in, to either fill in the infill, right? So we can bring in a new home and be able to sell those new homes to residents. And then we can start working on the park-owned homes that are there. And residents will then see a value of owning because they see what's happening in the community and they want to be part of it. And to be part of it, they're going to realize they're going to have to own it. And that's when we find it's better if we lead first. This is what we're doing. We're showing you what we're doing. We're telling you what we're doing. We're showing you we're doing it. Now they want to be part of that process. And, we understand that there's going to be a time frame for them to believe in it, to say, okay, you know what? Now I want to own that home.
Okay, that makes sense. So you're basically, from day one, you're adding value, making the parks better, like physically making them better, and you are planning on selling those homes off over the course of time. You're not going to them day one and saying, hey, do you want a free home but double the lot rent? You're not doing that. You're making it better first from day one, and then after they see it better, they feel more attracted to the deal or they feel more at home or whatever it is, then that's when you go to sell off the home to them.
Correct. Because if you do it the other way, I always try to look at it from the other person's perspective, right? Yeah. And so when I'm sitting on the other side of the table, you're essentially asking the resident to pay more for the same, to be in the same situation. So now they might be in a home in a park that was already undercapitalized, was already underinvested in, and you're asking them to take more responsibility, and you haven't done anything first. So, our belief was if we were going to make this work, right, and we want to be good stewards of the land, we've got to lead first. We're going to come in, we're going to make these improvements, we're going to tell them what we're going to do. Like we're not hiding it from them. Like we want them to own their homes, and here's what we're going to do. But we do what we say we're going to do first, and then we go back to them and say, hey, Garrett, we told you we were going to do this. Now we're offering you the opportunity to buy the home but look what's been done and look what else is coming, right? So now we've gotten a little, we've been able to build some trust. And so being part of that, we make it something that they want to be part of long term. And quite frankly, the residents are already there. If they've been there for a long time, they probably still want to be there. And now they can lock in and we can create a pathway for home ownership for them. And we can, for the community, we could get a long-term resident, which we feel is most beneficial for us.
Love that. That's huge. Yeah. And it's providing value, you're providing value without asking for anything in return, and so people appreciate that, So when you're doing this value add, I mean, just in your experience so far, what's the best ROI on value add components that you've done so far? What are like a couple, 2 or 3 that you're just like, yeah, this is better than doing anything else?
Got it. So, I like to say, the most exciting day, right, that you have is when you buy a park, right? Like the day you buy the park and the day you've been there, Garrett, like the day you close, you're super excited. I can't believe I did it. All this work, I got this done. I got that, and that's a great feeling. And I joke around with my partner on this, and like the second best day you have is when the roads get done, because there's nothing like watching. And I don't know if it's the little boy in us, when you go there and you see the roads that are being done, the whole community watches. It's so impactful. Everyone, no one can say they don't like the roads being done, right? Like that is a huge, huge value add impact. But that's a high cost, right, to do that. Yes. And you're not. We spent hundreds of thousands, and then throughout the course of my career, I've probably put millions of dollars into roads. And but that's a great impact. But on the flip side, the thing that has one of the key components that has a great value creator is in creating a culture inside of your community, right? So, the high cost, high impact is the roads. The low cost, high impact is creating a culture inside that community. And you're doing it anyway. You're either intentionally or unintentionally doing it. But by creating an intentional culture and getting your residents to buy into that and seeing and being part of that change, that is a low cost method to really create value, because quite frankly, Garrett, everybody wants to live in a clean community, right?
Yeah.
And everybody wants to live in a community where they know their neighbors care, right? And they know that rules are going to be followed, right? And equally enforced, right? And they have a clear expectation of what's going to happen. And that doesn't cost a lot, right? Other than time and intention and focus. But if you could do that and marry that with some really high impact improvements, whether it's roads or amenities or cleanup, those are things that when you put them together, that becomes I think a great package, a value creation package that you can offer your residents.
Wow. That's huge. So you're putting a lot into branding, basically. When you buy these communities, you're rebranding them, or maybe putting a lot of effort into the previous brand that you purchased, if it's already established, or just creating it from scratch. Is that kind of what you're saying when you're talking about culture? Or is it more so like the operations, management, communication side to them? Which one is it?
So that's a great question, because there's really two different types of communities you typically buy. And so we when we buy a community that's been run down, I mean, day one, the first thing we'll do when we close, we'll have a big sign up there, change is coming. This is now a Park Haven community. We want the residents to know that, hey, things are going to change, right? If it's one of those communities that are like that. Yeah. And then if it's a community that's, hey, we're there, it was managed, it's just maybe needed a little, capital to accelerate its growth, then, hey, improvements are on the way. So we look at it two ways, right? To your point. Mm-hmm. But we want the residents to know when we acquire a community that there's going to be a change that occurs, right? There's going to be improvements that are going to be made, and we're focused on delivering that to our residents. So, one of our most recent acquisitions, right outside of Mobile, Alabama, the month before we closed on it, and we talk now because obviously all these storms obviously are in everybody's attention. There was a tree that came down on a home and scissored it, and we saw that. And you see this often. You have these communities and they look. The layout is beautiful, but the trees or the landscape could be hazardous. Mm-hmm. So the first thing we did, day one, we closed. The next day we have our entire crew going in there, our tree cleaning crew, and we're removing anything that we think could be a hazard, right? So this is cleaned up. And so now as we went into storm season, we know that, hey, we've mitigated that risk, right? So there's a value. If you had, a large oak tree hanging over your home, that's obviously a concern. If we've removed it for you, now we've eliminated that concern. And then we can go to the road improvements and the other changes that we're doing. But now you can see a market difference for you, because we're letting the residents know that, hey, we care. We want to make sure that we're doing everything possible to ensure that your living experience is not impacted by things that might happen around us. And then we're going to try to keep that community running the way it should.
So you really look at trees as being one of the largest risks when evaluating a park. Is that what you're saying?
I think trees are they're beautiful, right? To look at, but trees around homes could be very challenging, and you have to mitigate that risk. I know. Yeah. You have to make sure that that's something that you monitor, and it's a constant review. It's not something that you do one time and forget it, but you have to constantly review that to make sure that you're mitigating that risk throughout. And then having that done is something that you can obviously go back with your insurance companies and say, hey, look, this is what we've done. This is how we're mitigating that risk. And I think that's something that's super important, and something that as an investor or you're looking to invest in the space, something that you can't overlook.
For sure. Yeah. So, with some of those risks when you're looking at these deals, right? What are some risks that you're seeing or that you have seen when you're evaluating a deal where you're like, I can't justify this risk, either through price or maybe it's not an area or something that you don't want to own, because you're buying value add parks, right? So it's like a lot of these places are rough, but how rough is too rough? What risks are just absolute no's and red flags for you? Talk to me about that.
Sure. I'll give you a perfect example. We were looking at a park in North Carolina. We were super comfortable in the market. It looked like it was a great value. I mean, it was probably about 52 lots, 53 lots. And it happened to be in a flood zone by a river. And what was told, it was like, it's only in the back, right? It's only in the back, not where the homes are. So when we get on site to do our diligence, one of the first things that we notice is that right next door, there's, a separate lot with a mobile home. And when I tell you, Garrett, I mean, this home must have been 10 feet up in the air. Like it looked like there was a basement underneath. And I'm looking at this home, I'm like, there's a reason why this home is this hard, right? There's a reason why this person decided to elevate their home 10 feet. And, one of the things that you have to do, I think, when you're in this space, I mean, you have to be comfortable talking to people. I mean, this is the ultimate people business, right? And I think real estate's the ultimate people business. It's never about the bricks and sticks. It's about the people. And in the mobile home park industry, it is really a people business. So when we go down there, we'll talk to residents. We'll see what their experience is, who's been there long, and the resident can always tell you the whole history of the park, right? Like there's always somebody there that knows where, all the lines are, when this broke, when that happened, can give you the whole history. And it just turned out that the whole back of the park when it rains, and if anyone's been down, I know you're in Arizona and you're down in the Southeast, so you know this, but in the Southeast, you get rain. It is like a hard rain. Like it'll hit you and hurt. Like it's like serious rain. But when it rained there, the whole back of the park would get flooded, and people would park their cars in the front, and they'd have to walk there. So now you have a whole back of the park that's flooded, and we knew that it was a park that's on septic. So in my head, I'm thinking about all these septics that are now submerged underwater, right? So you know what that means, right? Where that's flowing. And, the homes were older, and then the problem would be getting newer homes there. You realize that you're always going to be capped because you're never going to be able to solve this problem. And that was a problem where even on a retrade, we just weren't comfortable picking that park up because it was something that we couldn't fix, we couldn't solve. We'd have to live with that. And it was just something that we weren't comfortable knowing that multiple times throughout the course of the year, the whole rear of our park would be flooded. Those homes probably are going to have some sewage waste that gets floated up, and bringing in a new home isn't going to fix the problem. So that was something we agreed that we could not live with. We just we said we're not comfortable with that. So
flood zones, big no. That's like a red flag.
Big challenge. Big challenge.
So flood zones. Have you ever walked away from a deal that's not in a flood zone? Were there other deals that you didn't have a flood zone in, but you saw other risks and you're like, I don't feel comfortable with this? What was that like?
Yeah, we again, we've seen some parks and we do infill, so that's something that we're familiar with, we're comfortable with. We had, one of the things that you've got to look at, and what we feel that you got to make sure that what that infill really is, right? Just because the park says, and recently we were in contract on a portfolio, and inside that portfolio there was like an 85 unit park. Well, they said it was 85 lots, and 85 lots. Okay, and this is, this was the big park in the portfolio. So as we're drilling down, and then we go down to meet with the county officials, right, to make sure that we know what the process is. If we're going to infill, what can we infill? Are these lots active? Are we going to have any problem bringing in homes, right? Because last thing you want to do is own the park and then realize you don't have 85 lots, right? So you want to find this out in diligence. And when we got to diligence, and as we're talking to the city officials, it came to light that while there was 85 lots at one point, which was true, the lots were not conforming to today's standards. And then we wouldn't be able to fill in those lots, right, or unless we did, we'd have to do certain sort of soil tests and sets. And by the time we realized what the cost was and where we'd probably end up, the economics of the deal just didn't work. So the second thing we'd want to make sure is that we're in a county that we're comfortable with, that we're in a county that is going to be, that we know the rules and regulations, that we're not going to inherit a problem without knowing what the issues are beforehand and have a way to solve it. And if we're not comfortable with what that might mean, then it's better to walk away from a deal than to go forward just to say, hey, I want to do a deal. Like, it's not about a door count. It's about a quality of, unit count, right? So if there's a situation in there that we know that we can't overcome, or we'll just take too long and too much brain damage to get done, then we'd rather not get involved. I mean, there's enough challenges that we have to face. We don't want to create more headaches for ourselves.
So on infill deals, you're really talking with a lot of the city and the county, making sure that you can actually infill this. And if you get any problems, it's basically not as attractive in your eyes.
Well, it's all about the economics of it, right? So if I want to know, if I'm paying for an 85 lot community, I'm getting 85 lots. And if I'm only going to get 65, well, then I've got to account for that, and I've got to pay for a 65 lot community.
Yeah.
And if I can't quantify what that is, then I've got to make sure that I'm going into worst case scenario. And if the seller doesn't see it that way, then they have two options. They can fix the problem themselves and then come back, or we can work out a number that makes sense. And so when it comes to that, we have to, any buyer has to stay very disciplined in terms of where you need to be, making sure the economics work, because you only make your money when you buy, right?
Of course.
That's it. And if you make an error on the acquisition, I mean, the only thing that could solve it is time, and then it extends out the time of ownership, and then you better hope you're right on everything else.
Yeah, don't want to be in a position like that. So in your eyes, what's like a perfect value add deal? If you could just create one on paper where you're just excited about, what's a perfect value add deal in the Southeast? We're not talking expensive markets like Arizona, West Coast, East Coast, like Southeast, perfect value add.
So are you talking price point per lot or per pad? Are you talking like how are you what makes it perfect, or just anything in general?
I would say like what's a perfect value add deal that you're looking for, right? Like something that you can add value to, that you can exit either in a refi or a sale in 2 to 3 years, least headache. What's like an easy path?
So we do joke around in the office that we do want to get an easy one, right? Like, so we that's one of the
waiting for the easy
running things that we talk to each other when we look like, why don't we try to get an easy one? And then we look at the ones that we think are easy and we're like, if we're going to do this, we might as well do that, right?
Yeah.
But I guess in general, one of the things that as we look at it, we're looking at if we're in a market that's per occupied lot, we know that the exit is $45,000 per lot, and economically stabilized, physical occupancy stabilized, market. We know we get $45,000 a lot, and we know that we can acquire those developed lots, right, at a basis of between $20,000 to $25,000 per lot. That's something that becomes attractive to us because we know what our initial investment would be to infill that lot, right? In terms of bringing a home in, setting it up, and then what that ROI would be on that investment. So that's something that would become attractive to us because we see that we could come in, we can create some value, right, in the undeveloped lot, or the create some value in the lot in the infill, and we have some equity upside. Plus, we have that ongoing cash flow. So that's something that we'll look at. That becomes exciting for us. The other thing we like when we can find a situation where there's some excess property there, which either could be future development, like we're in the process of a couple of expansions on some of the sites that we have where the market's been strong, where we've been able to execute on the business plan, and now we know that we can expand out the existing community to meet housing demand. That's something that we look at as well, because we think that it's challenging to build a new park from the ground up. It's very costly to bring in the utilities and to get the entitlements. It takes quite a bit of time. But already having a community that's established, and by expanding off of that, it's typically a little bit of a even if it's a slightly shorter time frame, you already have an asset that's performing, and so the development isn't as it's not a liability. It's just an accretive growth that you can have. So those are two things that we look for. In an opportunity for us, Garrett. I mean, ideally, we like to be 85 lots or better. In a market that we're at, we're looking at parks that are 85 lots or better, and we're downstream right now in a community that's 271 lots in a great market. So I mean, that's something that we're really, really excited about. Where it's a big infill, but we know that there's market demand there. Like we know that we're getting it at a basis where we could infill at cost, and we can make our model and underwriting work and still generate the returns we need for our partners.
So how many communities and total lots do you own right now?
So right now we own 15 communities. We probably have currently active a little over 1,200 lots.
Nice.
We have about 300 lots in development, like in terms of expansion off of what we have. And we're in contract for another 271 lots.
Nice. That's amazing. So, and it's all spread around the Southeast, Alabama, Georgia?
We're in Alabama, Georgia, and North Carolina. Okay. We've typically looked at this, and one of the things that if you're, I mean, this, you're remote, you operate remotely. Yeah. We look at operating in hubs. We have we've built out some teams in some very strategic locations. As we build out that team, we like to be in geographic hubs. So if we need coverage, we have a team member that can get there on site, and we can get the work done necessary, and call in outside contractors where needed, rather than completely rely on third-party vendors for all the work. So when we have an effective hub or effective team, we look to build out around that, almost like a wheel. And then as we go into a new area, obviously the first community has to be the biggest, right? Where we have to be able to cluster them together, and then, then we could add supporting communities after that.
Okay. So obviously this is the MHP CashFlow podcast. I think cash flow is a carrot that is dangled, and it's kind of, what we're looking for. Not maybe day one, but eventually we want it to be stabilized enough to where it does produce really good cash flow. So in your portfolio, or during your track record or your experience, what has been the best cash flowing park that you've had? And talk to me about that deal.
Ooh, that's a great question. So the best cash flowing park that we had, point blank, there was a park that we acquired off market. It was interesting enough. We had been in that market. We were talking with a different owner, and we came close to a deal, and he kind of changed the deal a couple of times on us. And what I did was, before you got to his park, there was another park right on the highway, and we love the area, we love the market, but this guy drove me so crazy that I just started talking to the other owner, right, of the other park, and we just struck up a relationship, and he wasn't ready to sell, and he's like, Frank, I promise you, when I'm ready to sell, you'll be my first call. And I told him, let me be your first call, let me be your last call. So he called me, told me he was ready to sell, he was ready to retire. He had somebody else that was calling him, making an offer. And finally, we had been out there. He actually had to stay at his cabin he had a big property and he had a cabin with a man-made lake, and he had to stay there. And, we struck up a relationship in a trust between us. And he said, look, if you could give me this number, you could get the park. And we bought the park. It was 98 lots. 93 of them were occupied, all tenant-owned homes. And he had a, part-time handy guy, and we brought him on for a little bit more of a role with us. Super guy, became a friend, and we're still friends to this day. And the park was a very consistent performer, with the fact that everybody owned their home. Our operating expense ratio there went as low as like 28% for 1 year, which is really low. I mean, and that's including with a management fee. I mean, it was just historically great payers. People paid on time. Rents were low. I mean, and we moved them slightly up, but again, we didn't. We weren't leading the market. And so we were consistently at a 30% OpEx ratio or below, right? Which was great. And our yield on that was probably, 15% cash on cash, which was great, right? And then, we had a great exit on that, which was fantastic. And typically when we look at these deals, Garrett, I mean, we underwrite that within 24 months that our yield on cost is going to be double digits. I mean, that's where we want to be. And we've been fortunate to have been executed at that point. I think over the time that we've been doing it, I think our lowest annual returning deal has been about 15.6%, and everything. That was our first deal where we had the challenge, and everything since then has been, like 20% or better. So we've been very, very happy and fortunate with that, with the team that we've had down on the ground.
That's awesome. So how are you underwriting your markets? Are you, posting Facebook ads? Are you active on Facebook Marketplace? Are you looking at best places? How are you kind of underwriting your markets? What are you looking for? And, how are you establishing what price you can sell a mobile home at? I know it's obviously dependent on condition, but it's also very dependent on market. So, because some markets in Alabama, you can sell a single wide for $5,000-$6,000. You can also in other markets sell it for $20,000 to $25,000. So, how are you underwriting?
So the homes for us are in a profit center, right? So for us, we know that there's an NADA value for these homes, right? But they're not a profit center for us. So we're not necessarily looking at some of these homes where we need to get that number. What we've looked to do is kind of group them, right? In terms of a rating system, and homes at a certain level will require, we'll look to get, X, and homes at a different level will look to get Y, and homes at a different level will look to get Z, right? And it depends on how the condition, the year, the make, the model, right? And that'll kind of give us an indication of exactly where we can kind of set the market there. And we look at it as a total cost payment as well, right? So if you're selling this on terms, we understand that we know where we want to be payment wise for our resident, right? So, we look comparatively what a rental in that market will be, and we want to be able to show value underneath that. So if someone's all in cost I'll give you a perfect example. We're in Jacksonville, North Carolina right now, where we've got brand new homes that are being sold, right? 3-bedroom, 2-bath, brand new, that after they get their financing from third party, from 21st Mortgage or Triad, their total payment with lot rent is about, a little under $1,100 a month, where a comparative 3-bedroom home for rent or a 3-bedroom apartment is anywhere between $1,300 and $1,350. So I can offer value. I could still meet my underwriting, because we bought at the right basis. We could still make our underwriting guide. I could show my resident value. Like, you could go somewhere else and you're going to pay, 15-20% more. You're in a new home. I'm filling up the lots. I'm getting the numbers I need to execute on my business plan, and it's a win-win situation for everybody. And so that's how we look at, setting prices and setting guidelines. So this way we can create value for our residents to be there and value for us as well.
So you're looking at total overall monthly payment for them, right?
Correct.
And you're wanting to make sure it's comfortable for them, that they can actually stay there and be sticky tenants, And so that's what I see a lot in the deals that I'm looking at is, park-owned homes that can rent for $800, or maybe they're rented for $800 right now. And then how are you looking at a value-add deal like that? Are you looking at, okay, I can charge $400 for lot rent and $400 for home rent? Or are you more heavy on the lot rent side to, look better bankable to a local bank or a credit union, doing a lower RTO balance? It's kind of like a double-edged sword. So how are you analyzing that?
Well, that RTO income, like if you did a lease to own option, that's going to go away at some point, right? So,
yeah.
It almost becomes something that you it's nice to have while you have it, but you can't, project on that for forever, right? Because at some point that term is going to be out and that's going to be gone. So when we're underwriting and looking at this, we know that additional income is going to dissipate. We're really looking at where is that lot rent going to be, and then how are we going to manage and operate that community most efficiently, right? And still be able to deliver the experience for our residents the way we set out to deliver that experience. So when we look at a park that might have those homes, like you're talking about, those park-owned homes, then let's look at a business plan for those homes to, there might be an income strip for a while, or there might be a value. How do we get that value for that time frame? But knowing that that's going to dissipate, and then we've got to really bank on the lot rent to drive the value of that community. Because if you're going to bank on that park-owned home rent, usually we found that your operating expense ratio on that side of the income is going to be over 50%, right? Because you're going to have to, taxes, insurance, maintenance, there's a cost to that turnover, right? Which will be, significant. So that, that could be significant into your profits over time. So we want to get those homes into the resident's hands, or to the right, somebody who wants to be a homeowner there as quickly as we possibly can.
Yeah. Well, and especially with the park-owned homes too, this is a expense that is almost hidden in the underwriting stage. Is you think, you're going to get however much money for insurance, let's say $2,000 or $3,000 insurance. But some lenders require, if you have park-owned homes, you also have to individually insure those park-owned homes, depending on what the lending guidelines will be. So, you might be underwriting $2,000 to $3,000 insurance, which is fine for general liability, but then you tack on the insurance for the park-owned homes. Now you're looking at $10,000 in insurance.
Correct.
And that can change the deal pretty drastically,
Correct.
So you're, yeah.
Yeah. And then you have to look at that, because a lot of times in the broker OM, they're not going to count that, right? Like, hey, your home insurance is going to be this. So you have to factor that in. So how are you handling that when you're buying a park? Like, what are you looking at doing there?
Well, yeah. So it really just depends on what the current rent roll is. And I may be doing this wrong, but what I'm looking at is obviously not insuring the park-owned homes, because it's just such a bigger expense. I like the tenant-owned aspect, but I also like a mix, because for me, just when I'm underwriting deals, I'm looking at what the market debt is right now. And really, if a park-owned home is in good shape with a good long-term tenant in there, and you properly budget for the maintenance and CapEx, I think you can justify some mix of park-owned homes into a community, whether it's 70, 80% tenant owned and then a few, 10 to 20% park owned to really just bump that rent roll up. A lot of the deals that I'm underwriting, it's really hard to justify lot rent with market debt right now. And maybe it's an LTV play. Maybe it's, I'm looking at 70 to 80% LTV, maybe to make some of these deals cash flow a little bit more in order to pay the investor returns. Maybe it has to be at 60% LTV, So when you're analyzing like that, what's kind of your LTV play when you're looking at getting bank debt?
So for us, right, again, we're looking at it like we're not looking at day one cash flow, right? We understand that there's a yield that we're going to get day one, but for where we want to be is what can we do inside of 24 months that we can get our yield on cost up over, 10%. And then at that point, when we're recapitalizing and pulling money back, that's where we could start to see accelerated returns for our investors, right? And so the way we structure our deals from day one, or the way we set expectations, is we're not going to go in day one, right? With in a turnaround play, in a community that might have park-owned homes, and we understand the value of having a resident-owned community long term, right? How that's going to really create the value down the road at an exit, because if you're looking to sell the community or sell a portfolio, the value really is in on the tenant-owned homes, not the park-owned. Then if you're looking at the longer-term time horizon, we're going to eat a little bit of the short term to get the community where we need to, and then those residents will feel like it's a value for them to buy those homes, right?
So
we're going to sacrifice the first 12
You're
18
sacrificing
months.
day one cash flow for your exit equity, basically.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay. I like that play.
Garrett, I'll tell you, it's all about setting expectations, right? And I know, you're out here and you see, like, this isn't an easy business, right? People like this. This business is hard, right? Because you're dealing with people and you're dealing with people's homes.
Yeah.
And if you set expectation for your partners and you say, hey, day one, you're going to be getting this. And if I tell you you're going to get X and you get Y, you're going to be disappointed in me. But if I tell you you're going to get, T and you get, something, and you get more, you're going to be happy. So I'm setting expectations from day one. We're going to take a little time to get this positioned right. But the equity multiple over time is going to work really in our favor, because it's been shown and proven the market likes resident-owned, tenant-owned homes, right? And they will pay a premium for that, right? And if the banks will give you a premium for that too, you'll get a compressed cap rate, because it's a cleaner books and records for them to see. So it's going to take some time to get there. There's no shortcuts. You can't go there day one. I'm going to give you this home and you're going to pay more. Well, what if the home needs work, right? What if that resident doesn't have the capital to do that work? And what if that home on the exterior needs work, and now you still can't bring in a new home, because who wants to pay for a new home if that older home hasn't been updated or maintained? So we're going to do that work first. And we know what the time frame it's going to take. Our team knows what they need to do, and when that's done, the value is going to be there. But fortunately for us, we've been able to do this and have proof of concept through a number of deals, that the people who have been with us realize that that little bit that you're going to eat up front, it more than pays for itself down the road.
So you're delaying a lot of gratification, basically, right? And so even on some of these parks, what you're saying is they're not extremely cash flow heavy, but you have equity heavy in your parks. You have a good position on these parks to be able to cash flow a little bit, but you're really going to make your bang for your buck when you refi or when you exit. And when you do that, are you taking a cash out or are you 1031ing it into another deal, or just depend on the actual capital gain? And talk to me about that.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So now when you're running a syndication model, obviously that goes straight back. We have got a platform right now that has a longer term time horizon where we have some flexibility. If we're doing a refinance, we could use that capital to expand the base, right? So that's one of the things that we want to be able to take advantage of, right? And sometimes when there's pros and cons to each model, but one of the cons of the syndication model is that once you're done, right? You have cash, you have to send it back, and whatever those implications are, they go to your investors on that. We've extended out the time horizon of our platform, which gives us, and through the fund, it gives us the opportunity to redeploy that capital to expand out and to build out more equity. But like you said, each one of these properties, there's a J curve. And once you hit that curve, all of a sudden the cash starts to really pour in, or starts to accelerate. So you just have to be able to get through that period of transition, right? And that's why we talk about there being a transformational phase. We allocate 24 months, but we've seen that over time, we can compress that time frame from 24 months to 18 months to 12 months, and the faster you do that, the faster those returns start to accelerate.
So you're setting really good expectations with your investors, right? Because I know a lot of investors, they want to get paid day one, right? They want that cash flow from day one most of the time for your average LP out there, right? So you're setting the proper expectations with them, saying, look, this is a value add play. We're going to put some money into it, but once we get to month 8, 9, 10, or month 24, this thing's really going to start cash flowing and start kicking.
Listen, you're if you're not buying an institutional asset, and I don't care if you're buying from a mom and pop, right? I don't care if it's a mobile home park or it's a pizzeria or a restaurant. If you're buying from a mom and pop, they're not running things the way an institution would, where you can see a predictable income stream, because there's probably a lot of things that you're not going to know no matter how much diligence you do. Mm-hmm. So if you were buying a business, any business, you wouldn't be pulling money out day one. And most of the people we deal with, they've all owned business before. You own a business, that you're reinvesting in that business until you create stability. We're institutionalizing something that hasn't been institutionalized. And if you don't give yourself that runway, right, and set expectations that, hey, we're going to have this runway, you're only going to end up disappointing somebody on something that should be great anyway. Now, if you're buying an institutional asset from a fund or institution holder, the expectation levels could be completely different. But that's typically not in our buy box, right? And if that was in our buy box, my expectations, or I would set expectations differently. So you're correct. It's about setting expectations and where that fits into your buy box. You can't look at deep value add and say, hey, I want day one cash flow. If you want day one cash flow, then you got to look for a more institutional grade asset, but understand that your equity increase is probably going to be less, right? So it's your trade-off. You can't have your cake and eat it too, right? You gotta have one or the other. Well, you can't eat your cake and have it too. It's one or the other. Right? You can have your cake and eat it. You can't eat your cake and have it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's huge. I mean, I need to hear that too. It's not all about day one cash flow. You're really building value in these communities. So I really like that aspect of what you're doing is, you're not just charging more rent and being a slumlord, but asking for a lot more money. You're actually like adding value to these communities and really making a big equity play in a lot of these deals.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's awesome. Love that. So what does your next 12 to 24 months look like? I mean, do you got any deals currently in the works? What are you looking for? Are you going to sell any 1031? What's your game plan?
So we are in contract on a 271 unit community in the North Carolina market. I mean, we believe that there's still some opportunity out there, and I think the next 12 months are going to be really advantageous at this point. I think there's I don't think we're seeing a distressed market. I do think that you see some distressed situations, and counterintuitively, I think as rates go down, I think more people are going to be inclined to make a move, right, to sell. And I think some people are coming up to the clock where they might have to sell, which I think creates some additional opportunity for us. So I'm very bullish. I think affordable housing is still a hotbed issue and will be for the foreseeable future, because quite frankly, we have not built enough homes in this country over the past decade. That has not changed. We're still about 4 million homes short, maybe more. And we need, and we are addressing the most affordable housing option out there, and that's manufactured housing. So I'm bullish on the sector. I think that there's going to be some really interesting opportunities out there. And while the last few years we were probably net sellers, right now we're looking at more strategic acquisitions in the Sun Belt, and obviously we'd like to expand outside of that. But right now we have a nice niche and a good team there, so we're pretty excited about being in the Sun Belt.
Love that. So last question. What makes a good operator versus a bad operator?
There's a lot of different ways that you can go with that. I think it's, number one, you have to be there down on the ground, right? And you have to realize the impact of what you're doing. I think you have to have realistic expectations for your investors, right? Because you don't want to create pressure on your capital, right? That's forcing you to make bad decisions. And you have to be able to see that business plan through, right? So there's levels of growth that you're going to see as you're growing your business, and we've experienced it too. It's about performance down on the ground and the impact that you're making down on the ground. And don't lose sight that regardless of what we're doing, we're impacting people in the most essential thing that we could be doing, which is where they're growing their families, putting their kids to bed, where they're coming home after work. So don't lose sight of that, and put out a good product from that, and put out the best communities that you possibly can, because that's super. If you do that, I think the other stuff just kind of flows from it.
Yeah. So the good operators make their communities better. They don't they don't underwrite perfect. They don't raise capital perfect. There's all these different variables out there, but when it really comes down to it, the good operators are physically adding value to their communities and making the tenant's life better.
Yes. You said it better than I did, Garrett.
Love that. Love that. Well, that's awesome, man. Dude, thanks for coming on. Shared a ton of value today. If anybody's out there that is a younger operator like myself, or is just wanting to get into the space, re-listen to this episode. Frank dropped a ton of value. So appreciate your time, and thank you for coming on. So how can people find you? Are you on social? Where are you at?
Sure. We are on social. You can catch me at my LinkedIn, Frank Rizzo, which is pretty easy to find. You could follow us at the MHPExchange.com, right? And we have a podcast, the MHP Exchange podcast, or you could check out our YouTube channel, Trailer Park Turnaround, where we'll show you what it's like to really be down on the ground, turning those communities around.
100%. Love your channel, by the way, YouTube channel.
Thank you very much, Garrett. Appreciate it.
If you haven't watched his videos, go watch some of his videos. A couple of them are pretty funny, but it's cool to see actually on site what you're doing to these.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And listen, you're doing a great thing here, and I wish you continued success, because I know we're some of the same market. So I know we'll run into each other in one of these deals one of these days.
100%. All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. Follow the podcast on Spotify. Click a like on YouTube, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks so much.